right. So, Liz, how are you and where are you at right now?
I'm great. I'm beginning my 2024 out in California. It's a very beautiful day. It's warm. Um, I feel very privileged to be here because it's
Did
snowing
y'all
in New York right now.
did y'all have an earthquake yesterday? Did I miss that?
Okay, everybody was saying we did. I felt nothing. I sleep through most earthquakes. Since I've lived here, I've only really felt one of them, and I woke up screaming. Like
I
I
can't
really felt that
imagine.
one, but none of the other ones ever. It's very weird.
Okay. Well, I guess that's good. Even if
Fine.
there was one, it was minor enough. Yeah. I'm in Louisiana and I don't know that we've ever had one other than, I
Yeah,
mean, we have hurricanes. That's like our go-to natural disaster, but we have preparation for that, luckily, I guess.
yeah. Are you in the New Orleans area?
No, I'm in Baton Rouge, which I mean, like,
Oh,
honestly, it's an hour away, so same difference. I'm actually from an hour south of New Orleans, though, if you can believe that. It's like the land that's barely hanging on by a thread. Um,
gotcha.
yeah, I came to LSU and for my undergrad and then didn't leave. So here we are.
Nice. There you
Yes.
are. Very cool.
All right,
All
so
right.
obviously we are here to talk today about both of your books that are out from Nightfire, Night's Edge, and then First Light. I have the arc of First Light right here. I was really surprised by how long this was, considering not that Night's Edge was really short, but it felt kind of condensed. And then I got the digital copy for First Light, and when I read it, I was like, man, there's a lot going on with this. Then I got the physical copy, and I was so excited that it was a chunky book. I don't know why it just made me so excited, but go ahead and tell us a little bit about I guess what's going on with the release. I know it's coming out in April. Nice Edge has been out for a while and you've released two, well, you're about to release another short story and we've already had one released on your Substack, I believe, that kind of
Yeah.
tie into this whole Night's Edge universe.
Yeah. It's funny that you said like, oh, First Light is really long. Because as I was writing it, I kept saying the same thing. I'm like, oh, this is long. Is this okay?
Oh no,
Like,
it didn't feel long when I was reading it, but I was like,
right,
man, she packed a lot in this one because, in my mind, Night's Edge is a very emotional, character-driven book, and not to say that First Light is not, it definitely is, but there's a marked difference in the amount of action I find that we see in First Light, and that I was a welcome change for me because I thought, like the second half of the book just flew by for me because so much was happening.
yeah, it was fun to write too. I think like I was in two really different headspaces for Night's Edge and then First Light. I wrote Night's Edge during the pandemic, so I think it
Right.
really loaned itself to that extremely claustrophobic, deep in your feelings energy that it had. And then, I don't know if you know this story, but like I never intended Night's Edge to have a sequel, which now feels crazy to me. Like, why would I ever end it the way I ended it forever?
Yeah.
That would be, I think that was just my nihilistic pandemic brain at that time being like, nothing means everything and everyone dies. Like, um, but yeah, so I never really intended to write a sequel. But then when Nightfire bought Night's Edge, they were like, hey, sequel? Have you thought about that? And I kind of hadn't. And then now it's like 3 years later since we sold it. And I'm like, I could not imagine
Yeah.
it not continuing and ending the way that it did. So I knew it was going to be more expansive and just open up the world a lot more. And that was really fun and unexpectedly
I
so.
am so glad that you did write a sequel. And I did, dare I say, I think I like First Light more than Night's Edge, which is saying a lot because I adored Night's Edge. There's just so much that you cover in both of these books and this whole universe that you've built, with even with the short stories that you've written, there's so much depth within such a short amount of space. And that's something that I think is really commendable about everything that you've written so far. Can you take us through kind of, I don't want to say your process because that's really expansive, but just, like the jumping off point of, from Night's Edge to First Light, how you knew where things were going to go. Because I'm going to be quite honest. When I finished Night's Edge, I was like, where's this gonna go? I mean, I had an idea. I knew it was probably gonna be dark. But again, I was just kind of like, where are we moving?
Um, I didn't really know either. It was this conversation that I had with my agent and my editor at Nightfire, Kelly, where we were talking about the sequel, and my agent pointed out, she's like, yeah, I mean, when Night's Edge ends, you kind of get the idea that like she's going to the police, she's going to tell them that Devin's coming to the house later, they're going to catch him then, and the reader is just meant to assume, this is how it was in the original version anyway, like the reader was just meant to assume that they caught him, and
Right.
hooray, he was like caught off screen. Um and and then they were like, well, no, that could be a whole nother book trying to find this guy. Like, and how does Mia feel about him? And how does she grow and change knowing that this horrible person is still out there? And what does she do about it? And that is, all how it snowballed. So I kind of approached First Light, um, almost, it was like a cat and mouse structure, kind of in
Yeah.
like almost film noir. I come from a film and television background. I went to
Right.
NYU film, and like I am a TV writer. And so to me, it's always like, what movie do I think this is? Like, what structure am I kind of trying to draw inspiration from? And I was just like, this is like Killing Eve, it's
Oh,
this
yeah.
obsessive chase, um, after somebody who just gets under your skin, and your life is never going to be the same. Um, and I just, once I kind of got going on that, I found myself just like stumbling upon all the really interesting like crime drama film noir tropes that I was going to twist around in different ways. Um, I think I can say this without being too spoilery. The kind of like femme fatale character who maybe you're using to get
Yeah.
information, like, how do you twist that around and
Right.
empower that person? And yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. So it ended up in some unexpected places. I outlined the whole thing, and I knew my end game. I knew what that ending was
Right.
completely. And the same way I wrote Night's Edge, I kind of reverse engineered it, being like, if this, then this, and that's how we get to that ending scene. So I
Gotcha.
kind of
Yeah.
outlined, yeah.
Well, it was like once I read First Light, I was like, oh, this is the only way it could have ever been. Like this is like once it was all laid out there, it felt very organic to Mia's character and her between, it's all about in relation to her mom and then, the events that unfold in Night's Edge and her I guess like her recovery, how she, copes with all of what's going on, the difficult emotions that are tied to all of that. I mean, it's a whole that in and of itself is whole one box that you can put that in. And then she has to deal with how she feels about Devin because he's still out there. And then, we kind of open up First Light with kind of a bang within the first couple chapters with, seeing that the threat is still real and viable, and that really kind of gets things going. Um, but what I thought you did so well is the dynamic between her and Devin because of who he is as a character. He was authentically still him, and it made Mia second guess what she knew about her mom, what she knew
Mhm.
about herself, because her identity is so wrapped up in her relationship with her mom. And so this whole idea, I feel like some people would maybe think, why is she so obsessed with finding Devin after this? Like, shouldn't she just want to be safe? But whenever
Yeah.
you're so consumed in a lifestyle that she was with her mom and subsequently Devin, you can't let it go. Like it doesn't work that way. It makes sense from an emotionally intelligent level that it would unfold in this way in my mind. Like I was like, this, it just all makes all the sense to me.
Thank you. That was one of the tricky needles to thread in writing it, was like, if I'm Mia and everything scares me, why am I chasing this guy? Why am I trying to like infiltrate a network of like domestic terrorists? What am I doing? Um, and yeah, it was just all of these emotional beats that I really had to pick apart and look at the, just the organic matter of the situation, where I'm like, well, it's all about her mom. It's all about grief. It's
Yes.
all about wanting to take action when you have nothing. And this idea of
Yes.
like, you're not going to take a huge risk in your life if you have people you love and care about. Um, at the end of Night's Edge, this is a spoiler if you haven't read Night's
Yeah.
Edge.
Yeah. At this
Sorry.
point, we'll put out the
It's been out
warning.
for a while. Go read it.
Yeah.
But at the end of Night's Edge, she kind of doesn't have anyone.
Yeah.
And, she has no family. The thing with Jade is not working out. And so it's like when you have no one, what's to stop you from just throwing yourself out there and putting your life on the line, which feels nuts, but
Right.
I'm glad that it worked, that it felt real.
No, it did. And I think that I took like a bunch of notes, so I'm probably going to be referencing my notes on the side here. But, so her whole world falls apart at the end of Night's Edge. And like you said, she doesn't have Jade, she doesn't really have anybody. She ends up with Sandy,
Mhm.
who is her manager at the bookstore, and her life with her and her girlfriend is very different than the reality that she knows with her and her mom. And even though it's like it should be a comforting presence for Mia, it's dangerous in and of itself. And because she does like the scene with the oat milk and like not knowing which milk to use in the refrigerator,
Yeah.
because it's just like something that she's never encountered. It's a lifestyle and like almost a love that she's never encountered, that she doesn't understand that specific kind of language. And what I think you do really well with both books is, like you said, everything for her is defined by fear and consequences. In my mind, Mia is a character who doesn't like to rock the boat. She wants everybody to be happy and to not necessarily happy, but to not cause any more trouble than what's already going on.
Mhm.
And we've explored that mostly in Night's Edge, but now that that rug has been, pulled out from underneath her, she's kind of left, what does that mean for her now? And then there's a scene on the subway in New York after she's been out for a night and she sees something rather traumatic. And there's a line in there and it's like, I can't believe that I didn't listen to my fear. My fear is there to tell me, like what to trust. And that was such a big line to me because that's almost sums up her whole life up to this point is she's been listening to these feelings and these learned behaviors from her time with her mom and all of these things and it's she's having to rewire her whole mentality for this new life that she's living and it's a lot for her to go through and to figure out and I just felt so sympathetic towards her and so empathetic because I just want to give her a hug and let her know like it would be okay at some point but I think that you do that really well. I think that you explore the world that she knows versus the world that's actually out there and how those two kind of are at odds with each other and she's working to make that make sense in the beginning of the novel.
Definitely. I think that I appreciate that. Thanks. And there's her arc to me, even though it's like, this is a story about vampires and violence and chasing criminals. Really, it's about a recovering anxious
Yes.
people pleaser who was parentified. That's it.
Yes,
Like
yes, yes, yes.
there's so many things you said, like with her being in Sandy's house and not wanting to rock the boat and not understanding, like, I'm in a normal home with like normal things. And how does this feel? This is peculiar to me, and her not wanting to rock the boat. Um, I think that there is that emotional journey felt very authentic to me and personal to me. Um, Being a recovering people pleaser is something
Me
a lot of
too.
us are going through. A
Yes,
lot of young
yes.
women, just what is that? Just like oldest daughter syndrome. Just
Oh
like,
yeah. Well, I'm an only child, and so like I got like the full
same,
attention on
yeah,
that. So I get it. I
oh
do
yeah,
get it.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, and then especially like when she goes to therapy, that was a really interesting. You put a couple of really interesting things in there as well. She feels guilty because she doesn't feel like she's getting anything out of it, and she's feeling guilty because she feels like she's exploiting Sandy for her money being sent to the therapist. And everything comes from a place of guilt, I find with Mia, and that is so true of somebody who hasn't felt safe in their relationships, or somebody who doesn't understand the give and take that can come with a healthy dynamic or boundaries and all those good things. And then more importantly, whenever she was in therapy, she's talking to the therapist about her mom, she's like, I'm betraying her. She's not even here to defend herself. And that was
Mhm.
just like, oh my gosh, that hits so close to home for me because when you're close with somebody and you may not necessarily have the healthiest dynamic at the time, whenever you're confronting that later on, those are some very valid feelings that I feel are very true to life.
Mhm. Yeah, if there's so many times like when I've been in therapy and I'll say something and I'll be like, do I have any right to say that?
Yes.
And, you'll remind yourself like, well, I'm here in this therapy session to talk about my feelings and, you know, validate myself. So like, who am I to sit in therapy and invalidate my feelings? Like,
Yes,
ah,
and that's that getting over that hurdle is such a process. And like we see
yeah.
it with Mia. We see it her go through and like learn to take up some space. And I think
Mhm.
it's towards the end of the book, but she talks about the anger that she finally feels and that she wasn't allowed to feel before. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's so good." And that whole arc for her, it's kind of in a really strange and hurtful way to her, but still she comes into her own of this is my space and I'm upset about this, you know?
Yeah. I think anger is, in my opinion, it's a great and even beautiful motivator. There are people who would vehemently disagree with that. It's just what I have found to be true, where the moment like I decided that it was okay to be angry about something, it allowed me to literally like feel bigger. And,
Yes.
the actual concept of taking up space
Yes.
felt very tangible. And I
And
think that that was something very powerful I wanted Mia to experience, and that her mom never let her be angry about their circumstances. It was very just like, we got to do this. We got to get through it. Here's what we're doing. You got to be an adult. You got to help me. Done. Like, there will be no argument. There will be no time to dwell on it. We're not going to cry. We're not going to be mad about it. We're just going to go. And they were surviving. That's what you do when you're surviving. And she was never allowed to be angry. He lets her be angry, but you know, I mean,
and
it's
not ideal circumstances and not
not
a
ideal
safe way.
circumstances.
Yeah. And not a
No,
safe way.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree with that. And then, so kind of to follow the chronology of Mia's story in First Light, you said I've heard you say before you wanted to explore the dark underbelly of the side of Sarah's and how their lifestyle works and the Sarah recovery centers, and we get to see that more so in First Light than we did in Night's Edge. And I really appreciated the time that you spent writing about the time in the Sarah centers because a lot of creativity I feel like went into that, and it was just a very intriguing set of chapters to read while we see Mia, she volunteers there for a time, spoiler alert. And then some
Mhm.
other things happen that I won't get into. But if you want to go ahead and talk about kind of your thought process, how you invented those centers and kind of what went into the thought process with Mia's arc there.
Sure. Um, so the concept of a Sarah Center to me was always kind of like this cross between like assisted living, rehab, um, and prison. And I have a parent who has been in assisted living for a couple of years now, and one of the hardest things that I went through moving her into that space was trying to wrap my head around, how do you make this okay? How do you, like, you can take them in the Sara centers, the ones that are in First Light anyway, the one Mia works at. It's very, very nice. It's really
Yes.
fancy. They have all this money. It's the one that's in New York City. It's like top of the line. And I felt that way about, where my family member was staying. I was like, this is so nice. We should feel so great about this. And but there were days where I would look at the decor and I would look at the beds and the plants in the garden, and I would be like, fuck this place. This is all an illusion. This is a sad place. Um, but what else? But then what else can you do?
Right.
You don't end up there unless something has gone wrong health wise and you kind of have no choice. And so I was, you know, processing that in my own life while I was writing this. So I think there was a lot of um, that environment that was reflected in how I built out the SARS center that Mia works at, and the people who live there, and the
Yes, that
relationships she makes
was
with the patients and with the staff, and how she becomes a part of the community.
that was part of the interesting part is the connections that she makes, the observations that she has about some of the people that stay there, and then, consequently there's some things that happen with some of the folks who live there and Mia, which that the whole arc of her working there was part of her emotional journey. It whenever she first wanted to go, I was like, why would you do this to yourself? Why would you subject yourself to this after all of the pain that you've already been through, like with your mom? And but the more time that she spent there, I got it. Like it started to make more sense once she was there and she was, she had a motivation. She kind of has this resolve to track down Devin, and we're going to talk about the Christmas scene before she makes the decision to go to work at the Sarah Center. And she's, having a pretty bad Christmas, and she talks about how she's drunk alone with a spreadsheet. And I can say that I have been there before, not on Christmas, but I've been there
But,
before. You have a
yeah.
project to work on and you put your mind to it. And so this is her way of carrying out that project. She's gathering intel and all of these things. And what better way than to immerse herself in this culture? So I felt like that was the types of people that you meet there while you're in first light. Just to me, it was very interesting to read because it was not, I don't want to say it wasn't what I expected, but it was just a unique idea that I hadn't given much thought while I was reading Night's Edge, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think in Night's Edge, and this was kind of on purpose, that the Sara centers are meant to kind of be this boogeyman, where it's
Yes.
this mysterious, evil, scary place that if you go, you never get to go home unless you escape. And everyone's afraid of it. And then, to kind of turn it on its head, oh, what if they're not torturing them? What if, they have all these medical advancements and it's nice. But then, like I was just saying, like, how nice is nice when you can't
Right.
leave?
Exactly.
So it kind of flip flops back and forth between those two outlooks on it. So, and yeah, I think that her going to work at the Sara Center to me was also her way of reconnecting with what she lost, even though what she lost was
Yes.
so harmful and toxic. She hasn't been around Sarah's in months. There's a culture and a vibe and an understanding she has about them as people, that for better or worse is a part of who she is. And it's kind of like, I know people who have had family members who've struggled with addiction and then have gone on to like work as
Yes.
nurses or volunteer at a rehab or something. It is something that like it's
It's just what she
it's
knows. It's
it's
what she's
yeah,
familiar with
it's
in a
reaching out to
way.
familiarity. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can definitely appreciate that part. And then another part of the centers that I thought was really interesting that you talked about was the whole idea of anchoring. They discussed the whole idea of once you turn into a Sara, or we'll just say vampire, it's the idea of taking who you were in the past and how to frame that with who you are now, because you're not changing. Those memories are going to grow more distant, and the certain activities or behaviors that you find yourself recreating in order to be true to yourself. That whole concept was so interesting to me. Is there something that you like that inspired you for that idea, or
Yeah. So I kind of like, I consider becoming a Sara to be like an incredibly traumatic incident that cleaves your life in half, right?
right?
And so if there's anything we know about experiencing trauma, especially children, but all people, a lot of times when something like that happens to you and it's so shocking, your brain kind of gets stuck,
Yes.
and there are certain behaviors. Again, like I said, this is a little more common with kids, but like,
Right.
yeah, your brain kind of says, I'm here. This happened when I was 13. Therefore, there are certain things that I'm always going to do that are reminiscent of who I was when this happened because the world stopped.
Yes.
And so that's the way I looked at what it would be like to become a Sara in a literal sense, because for them, time actually stops. So like Cora, for instance, has Mean Girls memorized and only
Yes.
watches seasons of Survivor or The
Her.
Bachelorette from like before 2010, because she doesn't want to engage with any of the seasons of Survivor that like came later. She doesn't even care. It's her comfort food. And Mia's mom was the same way with all of her
Yes.
habits, and the things that she loved to do that reminded her of being a young mother or being a young artist, with the painting on the walls and stuff like that.
Right.
So yeah, the anchoring is like trapping you in time.
Yeah, I felt like it was a really interesting name that you gave it in and of itself. And then, I've also listened to your interview with Trevor on Slay House
Mm-hmm.
Presents. And I know that you had talked about, the idea of the turning being like, the trauma, and you're kind of stuck in amber in that time. And in a
Mm-hmm.
way, Mia is that personified for her mom.
Yeah.
She didn't want Mia to grow older because that would mark the changing of time that she was not experiencing for herself. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that that's something that was really interesting that was introduced in Night's Edge and then fully, flushed out in First Light that I just personally enjoyed because it's so true to life and what we know about like brain psychology and trauma
Mm-hmm.
and trauma responses, learned behaviors, trigger responses, all of those things. And especially like with post-traumatic stress disorder and, what we're learning about it now, it's much more common than anybody realizes whenever you react a certain way to the way someone talks to you now, if it's reflective of somebody who, didn't treat you so well in the past, those kinds of things. So I really enjoyed that continuation and that exploration into that side of things in First Light. And so from there, we kind of move into the action part of this novel where it just it kind of I don't want to say it flies off the rails, but so much happened. And I was having so much fun because I think you had posted about it on social media. It turned into like a road trip story
Yeah.
arc, and then, they get to all of these different places and all of these things happen. They reconnect with certain people, namely Devin, and Mia's interactions with him, and her not knowing whether to trust him, especially once he starts talking about Mia's mom, when he starts talking about Izzy, and she's
Mm-hmm.
trying to reframe, is he right? Is he not right? That whole section just was so, so good to me. I mean, my heart hurt for me. I don't want to say it was a good thing, like it was positive for her, but it just felt very authentic, the character dynamics between the two of them, and
Yeah.
especially with his agenda and what he was doing with, this organized ring that he's created out in Colorado. So do you want to go ahead and talk a little bit about your ideas for him? And we meet some interesting characters at this point, that we didn't know about before. And yeah, do you just want to speak to all that happens at that
Yeah.
point?
Um, yeah, ahead be spoilers. So,
Yes,
turn it
yes.
off if you don't want to hear any of this stuff. Um, yeah, so he's barely in Night's Edge,
Right.
except for like in the past, and then they have like one really weird interaction in the present day. But like he's not in it that much. And so one of the biggest challenges that I faced writing this was how, like, who is this person really? And it would be, to me, way too easy for him to just be this Charles Manson villainous cult leader. Oh my God, there was a reviewer, I don't remember who it was, who called him a dollar store Charles Manson. And I was like, literally, yes, that's
That's
great.
perfect. That's so good.
But yeah, it's so good. I would say yes, he is, but also what else?
Yeah, we can give
What
it
is
more
it about this
substance.
person? So I had read uh, I had read The Stranger Beside Me by Anne
Oh
Rule, which was
yes,
about
yes.
her friendship
With
with
Ted
Ted
Bundy.
Bundy. This guy,
I
this
know, I
fucking
know.
guy, like he worked at like a suicide prevention hotline, and she was saying she would hear him talk these people literally off a ledge, and like the things he would say and the way he would talk to women and be like, I see you, I know you, like I bought you this book because I thought about you. And like that, the reason she, because she was involved with the investigation, like she didn't know for the
Yes.
longest time, she could not reconcile it in her head that this was the same guy, but it
Right.
was. So I had just read that and I was like, oh, we can take so much from this. And then I had also read a book called Cultish, which was about the language of cults,
Yeah, I
which
think
is
I've heard
something
about
I
that one.
also integrated into this book, where the Saras, specifically the Adapt people, which is his group, they have different terms for things than the rest of the world does. Um, that just put a different spin on life as a Sara, and that they want to show it in a more positive, exciting light. And yeah, so I kind of just gave him all of that. And I wanted to do this thing where, I think that we've been living with vampires in our culture long enough that we think we know exactly what kind of guy that is.
Yes.
They're I mean, we could talk for an hour about just like the sexual dynamics of every vampire story ever.
Yes, yes, yes.
But every time I had him in a scene, I was like, there are two ways I could write this. There's a very obvious way I could write this, where there is just a very clear line of telling you everything you want to hear and being outwardly seductive and like just being a hot vampire leader. Great. Okay, that's boring to me, and it's also not sexy to me, and it's also like, I don't know. I really wanted to take the reader on a bit of a ride
Oh,
where
you did. You definitely did.
you're wondering. My editor said the funniest thing to me when she first read this. She was like, on my first read, you had me fucking terrified that you were doing enemies to friends to lovers and I was going to kill you. And I was like, I would never do that.
No,
So
I
I
can.
like, I'm gonna mess with you and make you think I might, just
You
to make you really
succeeded.
uncomfortable.
You succeeded because, I was second guessing. I was like, wait, did I misinterpret what happened in Night's Edge? Like, did I miss? So he's very authentically uh, narcissistic, manipulative, borderline. Like, in the way that I think about it is, kind of the whole him becoming a Sara is an amplification of who he was
Mhm.
probably as a human. And then his time, doing all this stuff with Adapt has only made it worse because he's, egotistical and he has a group listening to him now. So it only just enhances those things. And like you said, you could have written him in a way that was he's overtly dangerous, don't trust anything he says, don't, but you created enough air of suspicion and mystery that you are not 100% certain. Because, and we're reading all this from Mia's perspective, and she's not because of all of her emotional entanglements with her mom and with what she knows of him, but doesn't know him firsthand. Not like her mom did. Like she also has limited experiences with him. So I think that that really lent itself to having the reader just be like, where is this gonna go? Because I
Yeah.
felt like,
What are you
oh,
doing?
yeah, I was like, where are we going? Could
um,
this be? But no, you
yeah,
did an excellent job with that.
I think the idea was also to put the reader kind of in her mom's shoes, to
Yes.
elicit what I'm hoping was like some empathy for Izzy when you're seeing the way he talks to women and the way he just gets people to give him what he wants. And you as a reader, like, I probably would also maybe give him what he wants. And then you have to, ask yourself, well, how'd this happen to her mom? Anyway, that's what I was hoping to do. If that
Yes.
didn't happen, that's okay. But like,
No,
that's
I
kind of the
think
headspace I was in.
yeah, I think it came for me towards the end. Once we knew for certain, I was like, "Oh, I can so see how this went down for Izzy." Because you're reading from Mia's perspective. Her head's getting played with, your mind's getting messed with, and then the truth comes out in the end, and you're like, "Oh, I was there, hook, line, and center as well." So it could have, I definitely can see, and then even more so with the short story that you wrote, Amoxicillin, which I
Mhm.
read last night, and I really, really enjoyed. And I think that it's a piece that needed to be written in addition to 167 to add to the dynamics at play within Night's Edge and First Light. I think that they don't need it to survive on their own. I think that the story is fully fleshed out with those two books, but I think it's a greater appreciation and for folks who maybe don't have firsthand experience with people who are manipulative or narcissistic or whatever you want to call it. Both of those stories frame in such a way how the people within Devon's circle fall in line with the
Mhm.
way that we see things happen. And
Mhm.
I had a greater appreciation for Izzy's point of view after reading Amoxicillin, especially with her religious trauma,
Mhm.
kind of not having a family anymore, being on her own, All of those things were just very interesting to read about, and things, while I had considered them before, not to that same degree, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and that was, thank you. I really appreciate that. And you're like one of the first people to read it because as of this conversation that
That's
we're having,
exciting.
it's going to be out on Tor.com in March, but like we're
Yes.
talking in January. Um, I I definitely feel as though I'm proud of that story, but it was also a very vulnerable experience for me.
Yes.
Just yeah, it's something that I knew belonged in this universe though, because I think that there's a lot in First Light in terms of where Mia ends up emotionally that asks you to look at Izzy, her mom, differently. And I know for a lot of readers, reading Night's Edge just like villainized her entirely. It was like, no, no, she's not okay. She's not okay. She is making horrible choices and not doing right by her child. That's all true. Um, but there's a line in Amoxicillin that I think sums up her whole character, and I'm going to paraphrase myself terribly.
I have it
But
pulled up if you need me to look it up.
oh,
It's
it's
like
where she
literally right
says,
here.
it's where she leaves the house in the middle of the night and leaves Mia there for the first time, and she goes,
Yes.
I know it's horrible. Maybe only horrible people do that."
I,
Like,
I
what
think
is it?
I think she talks about how she's always home before she wakes up or something like that among the same lines around that point, and I'm gonna pull it up because I literally still have it
Yeah, if
right
you like
here.
find or replace the word horrible. Oh,
Let's
I
see.
remember. I know it's horrible. Sometimes you acknowledge a thing is horrible, but you do it
Oh,
anyway. Or
yes.
maybe only horrible people do that. Yeah.
Let's see. I'll see if I can find it. But no, in the meantime, while I look for it, I think that for me, I did kind of fall in the I felt wounded at the end of Night's Edge because, like I said, you're reading from Mia's perspective, and you establish such a strong empathetic connection with her whenever you're reading that you can't help but feel whatever she's feeling. So I was there.
Yeah.
And then, there's the give and take in First Light because, Izzy's not there anymore. So it's just Mia left trying to make sense of what happened and what lens she's viewing that through, and ultimately where you landed with ending it. I I was sobbing when I read the second to last chapter after everything goes down, and she's talking about the realization that she has about her mom and what she's deciding to forgive or to accept and what to not. That whole passage just blew me away. It hit me so squarely in the chest because it's so true, whenever you're close to somebody that you love, and there's always extenuating circumstances. And if you're in any kind of close relationship with anybody, there's going to be ups and downs and mistreatments and great treatments and all of those things. And for Mia and her mom, so much of the negative had defined the end of their relationship for a very long time. And so Mia, I think, even goes on to say, I'm not going to forgive her for the loss of my childhood because she recognizes that she did lose her childhood, which is a huge thing. But then she says, I'm going to come to accept, though, and I think her time with Devin makes her realize this, who she was as a woman at this time and what she lost and what she had to gain. And that whole passage was just gorgeous. That's going to stick with me for a long time.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I think that that's another thing that I was reverse engineering from. Uh, I was reverse engineering like plot wise and also emotionally, and that's where I knew I needed to land. And so everything had to serve that. So I'm so glad that that resonated with you. It resonates with me too. I mean, that's why it's there. So
Yeah, it's a complicated place to be in whenever you're trying to reach any kind of resolution with conflict in a way such as this. And I just felt like it was done so authentically for Mia. It was true to who she was and all that she had been through, and it made the most sense. And then, obviously we get the very last chapter, I think it might even be the epilogue, where we see what her life looks like after all of this. And it was
mhm.
so beautiful. I was crying even more after once I read that because it was like, but it was happy tears. I went from like ugly crying to happy crying within the span of seconds. But
I
I was
appreciate
just so glad.
that.
I was so glad that we ended up where we did because I was like, this girl needs a break. This girl needs a hug and some love.
I was determined. Uh, to give her something resembling a happy ending, I was like, no more. This poor girl, everything that could happen to her did happen to her. Just give her something.
Yes,
Give
I'm
her
so
not just
glad.
something, give her like everything. And
Yes.
I think that's something also that I wanted to explore, and something that like I'm going through personally. Is this idea of like, okay, if I didn't know how to be a kid, if I'm not sure what it means to be a totally present parent, how am I supposed to do it? What I have no
Right.
blueprint. I don't have any help. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And so sometimes I don't have children right now, but like sometimes I sit there and I think about it and I'm like, what would I say to them in XYZ situation? I don't know. Nobody said that to me. Like, and
Right.
then you
And
have to, yeah.
yeah, and like from like personal experience, my mom does not have a great relationship with her mom for very many valid reasons. And so it was straight I swear like there are parts of this book that came into my life because me and my mom have had to have that conversation about maybe why we are not so close with her anymore. And so she
Mhm.
did have to have that conversation with me as a parent who didn't know what to say or what to very much like you just said. And so it just rang so true to home because, and this kind of plays into like generational trauma and how we're learning with science that it's hardwired into us on a cellular level now whenever you experience these things deeply. But even just behaviorally and how you interact with people, but I think with Mia's storyline, there's so much hope. Because she had to fight for where she was at so hard. There's nothing but love. She wants that life. She's choosing to have that life. And so my hope for Mia, wherever she exists now, is just nothing but happiness because that's where we leave her, you know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Even
That's where
in
she should have left. And that's
yes.
why First Flight is the end. There will be no more. So I'm like, I'm really good with exactly where I left her. We're fine.
Good.
The short stories are all kind of me going back in time and just exploring the world and other side characters and just having fun with that.
Yeah, and I did find that line. It's it's horrible. Sometimes you acknowledge a thing is horrible, but you still do it. Maybe only horrible people do that. And then she
Mhm.
kind of keeps going through the motions, and it's like she has this moment of like recognition, but she's so
Yeah.
deep in it at that point with Devin. It's just to me, like you said, it explains so much. Like even though she's aware, she's in it. She's in it deep with Devin.
Yeah, I think that like that's how it can be sometimes when you're in an extremely toxic but also all-encompassing relationship. Part of
Yes.
your brain is like, this is not okay. This is not okay. But like chemically, you're like, but I have to. And
Yes.
that, it can be, there are people who've read that story and are like, oh, well, this is an allegory for a parent who has an addiction. And I'm like, yes, it is. It's also just plain and simple about being in a really toxic relationship that you
Yes.
just can't get out of. And it can also be that.
Yes. I think it operates on both of those fronts, which is really just smart given that this is only 44 pages long, double spaced,
Mm-hmm.
in such a
That was,
short space. There's a lot that you cover with Izzy, and I it just gave me a greater appreciation for her character because like you said, there's a lot of negativity at the end of Night's Edge going into First Light, and then you're kind of left to unpack it with Mia in First Light, and then this just gives it a whole different perspective, more layers to it, and I think that that's probably one of my favorite things about everything that you've written within this universe is how layered everything is, how applicable it can be to, relationships, addiction. I mean, we could go down the list of all the different things that it's applicable to. And I really feel like whoever you are as a person when you're reading it, you're going to pick up on those things. And that, to me, that's one of the greatest things that I enjoy about reading horror in particular, because everything's cranked up to 10. You're not going to miss it. Um,
yeah,
Everything
totally.
that everybody has a different experience and can take all these different things, from two books. It just is a jumping off point for so many different things.
That's also why I just love this genre so much, because you can take something as fantastical as a creature like a vampire and just, like you said, so much is applicable to that being. Like, give me your demons, and I
Yes.
can superimpose all of them onto this. Um,
Yes.
and it's a receptacle for so much human negativity. Just that's why we're that's why we're continuing to be fascinated with vampires, and culturally they keep coming back and coming back.
Yeah, for
We
sure.
understand what it means.
Yeah, I do want to ask, were you always drawn to horror, or was it just kind of something that you found later on? Like what's your relationship with horror like, I guess is what I'm asking.
I kind of I've always been a genre person, so I love sci-fi, fantasy, and horror, and my tastes have always skewed darker. Um, and I think when I was growing up, I've been, writing for most of my life because I, just came to it young and I just enjoyed it, and it became, my whole world. And I think that like people looked at me and they're like, that's weird. You don't like horror. Like I remember I told my aunt when I was younger that I had read a Stephen King book, and she was like, you don't read that. And I'm like, yes, it did. Yes, it did. Like, I think people maybe I think maybe women get this
Yeah, I was about to
sometimes
say
where
I'm
it's just
so
like,
there with you because I feel
yeah.
like not to say that it's a man's genre or whatever, but it's just like I'm from the South. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of ideas of what you should be or what you shouldn't be down here, even though we're in 2024 now. And it's like you said, you tell somebody that you read that and you're like, "No, you didn't."
Like,
Or
ew,
you're
you like
afraid,
that?
yeah, or you're afraid to talk about it with certain people. And I'm like, this is no different than all of the other things that you all are. It's just framed a little bit differently. I don't know. It's a weird thing. And I've had my own weird relationship with horror because I started reading Stephen King in high school and then I came
Mhm.
off of it. And then I've just revisited it within like the last year and I've deep dove into all of this. So I
Mhm.
get what you're saying with that, with the feeling of, oh, no, you didn't. I did.
Yeah, and with writing too, I mean, so I think there's a lot of pressure to brand yourself. And when I first wrote Night's Edge, I had put out one other book that was like a dark fantasy, but it was YA. It was like a slightly different audience, and like I wrote Night's Edge just as its own. I had no idea that we were going to set it up at a horror imprint. We weren't sure where we were going to go with it, frankly. We just kind of went wide and tried to figure out where it fit best. And so when we went to Nightfire, it was actually the very first time that I was like, oh, I guess I'm a horror writer. And then I kind of looked at my back catalog of everything I'd ever written. And I was like, this is horror. This is a work of horror. This is terrifying. This is gross. This is sad. Why have I never considered myself to be a horror writer before? And I think it was very gendered. I think it had a lot to do with like, that's not you. What are you doing? You little girl. Like, so I think that I don't know. But now I'm so happy that that happened and I got placed there because I feel so cozy and I love this community. You're all so cool. I can't like I'm so happy. I feel like I just had like a whole second wave of just friendships and community that I haven't experienced in a long time. So I couldn't be happier that I ended up here.
Well, I'm glad to hear that because I have enjoyed reading your work so much within this genre. I mean, I hate pigeonholing things to just horror or thriller or suspense. I mean, this is a book that covers so many things, so it's just been a delight to read it all. Even within the if you just want to call it horror, if you want to call it speculative fiction, whatever you want to call it. And
Mhm.
I think that right now, a lot of people have talked about it being like somewhat of a renaissance, or that's happening right now. But I do
Mhm.
feel like there's a lot, as a reader, there's so much more that I want to reach for now than ever before. And I know that it's probably partially personal preference, but like with Rachel Harrison's work, I see both yours and Rachel Harrison's work is the stuff that I see myself the most in. That I'm
Mhm.
like kicking and screaming that I'm like, oh my God, I swear to God, I thought that and they wrote it. Like, I don't know how they got in my head and wrote it, but they did. And it's just it hits so close to home, and it's scary good is all it is. It's
Yeah.
very refreshing and nice to see yourself represented, or just to see yourself identify with a character, even if it's not something that you've been through personally. Just any of those things, and there's so much of it now. We are getting so much of it. It's so nice to have
It's so
variety.
mhm. Yeah, and I find like, oh, I love Rachel Harrison. She's so cool. I actually just started Black Sheep. I am several months
Oh
late
my
on,
gosh, it's so good.
and I'm loving it. And when I read The Return, I couldn't. So I had just gone to a bachelorette weekend at the Madonna Inn, which is the inn in California that the hotel the girls stay at The Return is like inspired by.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I was in the group chat with all the like bridesmaids just screenshotting this, being like, and this, and this.
Oh,
Like,
if I would have
what?
been, I would have never shut up about it. I would have been insufferable
Yeah,
because
I couldn't believe. And I was just like, this is so, how did she know?
I
It
know.
felt like
I
this.
read her short story, Bridesmaid, in her Bad Dolls collection like 2 weeks ago, and I'm actually in somebody's wedding coming up in the spring, and I was taking pictures of it and I was sending it to my mom because my mom's been hearing me talk about it, and I'm like, I swear to God, she's been reading our text messages. I swear to God.
Yeah, yeah. I think that what is so cool for me being a young woman in this age group right now is I get to write about my experiences as a human being, and I also get to see them reflected back at me. And that's another reason I just love this community so much. I'm just reading everybody's stuff and I'm like, I see you, I see you, I see you, and I see me. This is amazing.
That
So
is a really
yeah.
good feeling. All right, so we're getting to the end of the hour. I have two questions for you. One's kind of a heavy hitter, but I do want to go ahead and ask this. So you've mentioned that this story, everything that happens in Night's Edge and First Light and the whole universe that it exists in is a deeply personal matter. That you have taken some experience from and felt those emotions and put it within the story. And as a writer, I guess my question for you is what is it like to write from that place? And I guess my thing is like if I were to ever try and write anything about my trauma, I knowing that the people in my life would probably read it would scare the hell out of me. And so how you approach that, I feel is very graceful. So I'm just curious as to your process with approaching that and how do you tackle that?
Sure. I think the most important thing for me is having boundaries both with myself and my audience, which is to say, like, there's a reason I didn't write a memoir or anything like
Right.
that. And you know, I've never written directly about the things that my family experienced or that I experienced. I just kind of telegraph them to these characters. And in doing that, like I do feel I have to protect myself a lot. So you'll kind of hear me when I talk to you. I'll drop references to things that are real to me. But I think if you can put some pieces together. I've said more in other times than I say, I don't know. I've kind of like had to calibrate depending on how I'm feeling day to day. So it's also not a hard and fast rule
Right.
where I'm like, I will never say XYZ. I'm like, no, today I might. Tomorrow I might not want to. And I just kind of like respect how it's feeling inside me day to day. And in terms of writing it, I it was very absorbing. Like I'm not gonna pretend, especially when I was writing First Light. I don't know what was kind of going on with me at the time, but like I was all in. And I
Mhm.
think that it was a very enriching and beautiful creative experience, but it was also really draining. So like
Right.
um I kind of struggle to find balance, and that's something that like my friends and family don't love. That they're like, just take a break, go watch a dumb movie,
It's
do
not that
something else
simple. It is so not that simple.
today. And that's just how it happens sometimes. And I think though that because of all of that and just living and breathing it um, for 3 years, really, because I wrote Night's Edge and then First Light, and then during the time I was writing First Light, we were also developing a television series and I was writing it. So these characters were everything. And so I actually haven't written really anything since I did the two short stories,
Hmm.
which are still the same characters.
Right. Still in the same
And
universe.
same universe. I'm only just now really getting acquainted with a new idea and new characters, and I'm like 50 pages in, and I'm really enjoying it. But it's a process. Like
Yeah.
I'm just kind of giving myself grace, understanding that like I gave this one 120%, and I gave a lot of myself. And so I'm allowed to take a breather. So I kind of am considering 2024 to sort of be my gap year, even though I have a book coming out. So I'll be
No, I know
promoting
what
the
you
book,
mean.
but like it's my gap year.
Yeah.
I'm hanging. Yeah.
That's I feel like that's a good plan to be kind to yourself. Because I feel like your works, Clay McLeod Chapman's and Nat Cassidy's, I feel like you guys insert, your feelings or your experiences very well within it. Just reads very authentically. And I know like Nat has talked extensive, and he puts it in a forward and an afterward in his books, where he's pulling from. So
Yeah.
it's something that has interested me, whenever you pull from personal and put it on the page and how that all goes. But that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like boundaries and the grace that you talk about is very, very important.
I admire Nat so much for how transparent he is about his own experiences. I love him for that. And he's very brave, and I couldn't do it that way. And I wish I could. Maybe someday I will. He has a grace and a wisdom about how he approaches that is just so admirable. It's really cool. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so then my last question is, and you kind of answered it, but I was going to ask, what are you working on? If you're working on anything, what's 2024 look like? What are you reading? Like just what's going on and looking towards the future.
Sure. I am, like I said, I'm reading Black Sheep right now, and it's a banger.
I love that book so
Time. I'll
much. Oh my
probably
God.
finish it like tomorrow. Um, I'm reading whatever gives me joy. I have DNF'd a bunch of stuff already this year because I'm like, I'm not feeling it. It's not that it's not good. I'm just joy reading right now, and I
Good.
think it's great. And I'm working on a new standalone novel that is kind of a pivot. It's kind of a grounded sci-fi situation about sisters and aliens.
Ooh. Ooh, I like
So
that.
I'm just kind of drafting the whole thing and just seeing where it ends up. I'd love to do something else for Nightfire eventually. I have an idea that I'm like cooking up over there that again, like I said, I'm taking my time. And
Yeah.
when it's ready, and I think I was on strike for the greater part of
Right.
last year with all the writers. And so I'm slowly kind of like rebuilding my TV career, to be frank. And that's hard. It's been a hard year in terms of that. So that's another reason I'm just being patient and letting it all just come back together. And it's gonna be fine. And I and it's given me a chance to remember to connect with writing because I love it. And to
Hmm.
sit down every day, not because I'm chasing the yes,
Hmm.
I'm just chasing the feeling of writing something I'm proud of.
That's good. I like that. Yeah, I was thinking about that before this interview. I was like, man, because I mean, obviously it's January. We just left 2023 behind. I was thinking, man, the strike just had to be killer with how it interferes with it's your art and your craft and something you're passionate about, but it's also how you make a living. So it's like the psychology behind the strike blows my mind. I could probably spend another hour talking about that, but I'm
But it's
glad to
but it's
hear
over. Thank
it
God. Yeah.
is. It
We're on
is.
the other side. Yeah.
Yes, but I am glad that you are reading what you enjoy right now and not taking any space that things of don't bring you joy. That's good to hear, and I'm super excited for whatever comes next. I know 2024 is a very busy year for you. We have Amoxicillin, which is coming out, you said in March
Mhm.
on
Mhm.
tour, and then obviously First Light is going to be out in April. I'm so excited for you. I think a lot of people are going to really, really love it. Especially those people who love Night's Edge. I don't see how you can't love First Light after reading it. Um, so yeah, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about or touch base with? I mean, I want to give you the space to say anything that you feel like you want to add or anything like that.
Oh, what do I want to add? I guess I just want to end by saying thank you to you and also just the greater community of all these awesome bloggers and bookstagrammers and also other authors. Just like I came into this, I think about a year ago before Night's Edge came out, and I was just sort of dipping my toe into what this what it was going to feel like to put a book out. And I was so nervous. I was making myself sick over it. And I still make myself sick over it, but I can't even tell you how much easier this year has felt than last year putting this one out, because all of you are so awesome and so supportive. And like, it makes my day every time one of you, like, shows me a page of something you read and you're like, oh my God, what are you doing? Like, I just get so excited and I feel so lucky that you're all just kind of lifting me up and we all take care of each other. So I just want to say thank you to you and like everyone who might be listening. You're the
Oh, I
best.
appreciate that. Oh, I appreciate that so much. It's been a real joy. Like I said, this is just something that I've started to do, and I never want to be annoying, but God, there's just so much good stuff that I've been reading lately that I just want to scream from the rooftops. And I probably have more so now on social media than lately. But
I appreciate your screaming. I was so honored to be on your best of list on 2023. I was like, "Yay."
yes, yes. Oh, I know,
Thank
and
you.
I know that best of lists are like so a controversial topic, but I'm
I
like,
know.
come on, man, come
They're
on.
tricky. Yeah. It's
Oh,
like
all right.
how can you name the best of everything when you didn't read everything?
That's
You don't
exact,
know.
and I tried to write that when I wrote it. I'm like, listen, I read 150 books last year, but I didn't get to Chuck Tingle's Camp Damascus, which I know I'm gonna love based off of what everybody has told me. But I just didn't get to it. So it's like I know it, I put that in the article. I was like, I know this is not fair, and this is just what I enjoyed and what I got to, and I hope people know that. Because there's just so
Yeah,
much out there. There's so much, and it's such a good thing. It's a good thing to have so much.
no, it's awesome. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. I wish you nothing but the best. Like I said, I'm so excited for you. And yeah, I'm just so excited.